my name is Jason Fitzpatrick, and I'm the Chief Geek at the Centre for Computing History. We're basically a computer history museum just outside of Cambridge, and soon to be in Cambridge within the next couple of months. And yeah, we've put on this display here, which is just sort of going through technology over the past 40 years, or 50 years or so. And we've got sort of a section here dedicated to the 60s, which is fairly bare, as you can see. But we've got the old hi-fi stereogram system there, and the tellies of the time. But then something that does take people's interest is the Minivac 601. A lot of people don't think of computers having existing really in the 60s. And although it's really rudimentary, it is a computer, and it was one that was available to schools and taught computing. So you had 6 bits of information and 6 bits of inputs and outputs. So a computer from the 60s. Then we've got some of the classic old TV from showing a film there from 1960, and then typewriter, Morse code toys, and it's just really, it's quite bleak. Obviously, the 60s was not a big time for technology as we know it now. So then we sort of go around to the 70s. So the 70s, things changed a bit. We had the very first sort of games consoles come about. We've got the Atari 2600 over there, which was the first console that you could plug in the cartridges into in that way. Well, say it was the first, not quite, there was another one before it, but that was really popular in the UK. Classic sort of 70s ball stereos over there. So TV, video recorder, and Betamax, which come out in the late 70s. But again, it's fairly basic still, but at least we've got some gaming going on, and hi-fi and video was starting to come in. Then we've got the Pong, which is a classic game. The old binary system sold really, really well, and everybody loves playing Pong. And sort of just gives people an idea of how things have changed. I mean, it's not that long ago, really, in the grand scheme of things. But to compare that with Xbox 360s and everything else that's going on, it's amazing. Then sort of the old video cameras of the time. So there's your video camera, but as we know, machines now, they have the tape built in or the records the memory cards. This is just the camera that had to connect from a lead off onto a tape deck, which you'd have on your side. It was huge fun. It was the beginnings of home movies. Then Commodore PET, business machine there. So that was from the late 70s, and incredibly expensive. You're talking about sort of £1,500 then, and more for all the accessories. Equates to sort of £3,000-4,000 now. So so the PET is all up and working. All the computers that we had at the museum are out on display. They're all up and working. People can play on them. Then we've got a bit of fun. Toys of that era. So the electronic toys at the end of the 70s were starting to come out. Speak and Spell, Simon, Merlin, they're all really popular, sold really well at the end of the 70s, but people tend to associate them a bit more with the 80s, but it was actually late 70s. So then, the 80s. Classic ghetto blaster of the time. Trim phones, the early portable phone, so you can imagine carrying this thing around really just to make your phone call. And again, people think that mobile phones have been around longer than they have because they have changed so much that it's sort of quite stark in comparison when you go back to that sort of time. The NES, Nintendo and Mario, so going back to 83. So that's when sort of obviously Nintendo were getting big and then starting to dominate the home home game console market. And classic Amstrad stereos in every household across the country, I think, pretty much. Amstrad really brought technology down in price and made it affordable. So although it wasn't necessarily the best quality, it was still important because it allowed people to buy it that wouldn't have otherwise had the option. Then we've got a cabinet here of lots of different bits and pieces, from the classic personal stereo, and the mobile phone there, the Motorola brick phone. cameras, which in the 80s weren't digital at all, down to sort of some of the early computers there. So you've got the ZX81 or ZX80 down there, which is Sinclair's sort of first computer. And although, again, it was bringing computing down to a price that people could afford. So it was really it wasn't very good as a machine, but it was important because people could afford it, they could get to grips with computing. And then, a bit later on in the 80s, then there was a huge explosion in the middle of the 80s, 83, 82, 83, 84. The Commodore 64, brilliant for gaming, one of the best sort of games computers there's been at that time, biggest selling anyway. And the iconic Apple Mac with its tiny little screen. Everybody remembers it being a lot bigger than it really was. But it was very clear, it was a very, very good machine. But again, expensive, just a very expensive piece of equipment, especially for that time. A few more bits of old handheld gaming there that proved incredibly popular. And then on to the 90s. So, the absolute classic PlayStation console sort of really brought gaming into a new generation of people and made gaming cool as well. So that's quite an iconic piece there. Laserdisc player down the bottom. So that's another piece of technology that's just been and gone. But it was the forerunner to DVDs and now Blu-rays and things. And then a bit more technology in terms of mobile computing. So one of the very early MP3 players. Everybody assumes that Apple, did the iPod, the MP3 player, but there were MP3 players before that. And Apple just made it something that looked a lot better and worked better. Another piece of technology, digital compact cassette, been and gone. Nobody really ever heard of, but it was there. It was a try to get old cassette players to record digitally. And then digital cameras. So the 90s saw the whole raft of then digital cameras come onto the market. Very expensive, but it was the start. Nokia communicator on that stand there. So the early smartphones. Smart might be a bit of a strange word to use for it, but anyway, it was you could get your emails on it. That was important. And PDAs. We've got the Apple iPad down there, forerunner to the iPad these days. So it's quite a very small space of time, both on the stand here and actually in time. We've seen such a huge change in technology and how it's completely infiltrated our lives.
I certainly recognise some of these computers from school, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every school had one of these at one time, didn't they?
We've got another stand in the gaming area as well. We've got the BBC Micro, which was a big schools machine, but then in the 90s the BBC Micro was getting a bit old and was starting to be replaced by all these RISC machines. And what's interesting about these is they come from Acorn, and Acorn developed the ARM processor that then now become a huge company supplying all the chips for 90-odd% of mobile devices.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I see the ARM logo all over the place, and you're based just outside Cambridge, where of course ARM are from.
Yep.
Is there a partnership between you two?
There is indeed, yeah. ARM have been fantastic. They're sponsoring us to do this stand here today. They're also sponsoring us to take our museum from just outside of Cambridge into Cambridge. So we're just about to open up, subject to some planning permission and things like that, a 10,000 square feet building, and we'll have this on display permanently and a lot more. So computers, everything.
Do you think the tech industry as a whole is starting to take notice of its kind of heritage, if you like, and look back a little bit?
It is in a way. I mean, a lot of tech companies are really only interested in looking forward, and rightly so. That is the industry. But there is a lot of heritage there, and it's when you start to take a look at tech and then look at us and how we've changed because of that tech. That's when it gets interesting. We live our lives in such a different way these days to what we did sort of in the 60s, obviously. And I think if you were in the 60s and all of a sudden time stopped and then you were here, it would be like a different planet. It would be absolutely mind-blowing. I think that's something that we take for granted. We've gone through that time, we've seen it, we expect it now. We expect faster, better battery life, better graphics. But when you look into how things have progressed, it's absolutely mind-boggling. And that's what we're about. It's just to tell that story and tell those stories about companies like ARM, who have been so important in that story, yet pretty much stay behind the scenes quite a lot of the times.
We've had a journey through the last 40, 50 years of technology there, and when you look back at how it started, the mind boggles us to think to where we could be going in the next 40, 50 years, doesn't it? Really?
Well, I mean, people ask that. Yeah, they say, what do you think could happen in the next sort of 40, 50 years? But I'm quite happy not knowing, because we didn't know then in the 60s either, and it made it such an exciting journey that as long as we don't know what's coming for the next 30 years, it's going to be just as exciting. And I think that's one of the best things about all this, is all this new developments coming along, things that blow your mind that you just hadn't even considered before. Brilliant.